method was a good method, but we need to make sure that the modified Charleston does not hamper our growth in Louisiana and prohibit us from protecting our citizens and our residents from future damage caused by storms and also prosper economic development at the same time. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would yield back.
The gentleman from Louisiana yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Ohio seek recognition?
Yes, I move to strike the last word.
The gentlewoman from Ohio is recognized for 5 minutes.
And rise in opposition to these very able gentlemen's amendment. And while I have some sympathy for this issue, and it's not a new one to this bill, I believe that more consistency should be brought to the way we evaluate wetland impacts, not less, as this amendment would ensure. The Charleston method has been utilized for over 2 decades in various core districts and is a quick and inexpensive and consistent methodology for use by the regulated public and the Corps. In 2006 and 2007, the New Orleans District worked with its federal and state partners to modify the Charleston method so that it better reflected the unique conditions found in South Louisiana, resulting in the modified Charleston method that our colleagues have suggested. The use of this method is a long-standing one in many core districts. Many regulatory customers use the tool to assess their potential mitigation requirements for their impacts, as well as credits required at mitigation banks. This transparency in core mitigation requirements has helped the applicant prepare a complete application package and determine mitigation costs up front. Importantly, costs up front, costs often that are borne by the federal taxpayer. Suspension of the use of the Charleston method in core districts would require that any pending permit application under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act and pending mitigation banks would need to be reevaluated using a different assessment tool or methodology. In the absence of such a methodology, use the best professional judgment to determine appropriate mitigation requirements for impacts and for available credits in mitigation banks. All approved mitigation banks with available credits that were determined by the process would be temporarily closed until a new methodology can be developed and the bank's credits converted to the credit system of the new methodology. These banks were established utilizing the credit system of the Charleston method, and until a similar credit system can be determined for proposed impact sites, it would not be possible to correlate the new requirements in the old credit system. So we're into the weeds on this one, and we know that the difficulty at the edges where the water meets the land, where we have very severe coastal conditions that occur as a result of weather changes and so forth, do require us to be more land planning conscious. I think that the Corps, I've seen the work that they've done in Louisiana, and I appreciate the gentleman's concern about their home state. I think to try to change this in this bill is probably not wise policy, and we know the costs of these damaged areas to the taxpayers of the United States. With coastal storms being what they are, we anticipate greater coastal activity, and I think that wiser planning is better than moving to a process that I think that is less rigorous. So on those bases, I oppose the gentleman's amendment, but I do thank them very much for their deep service to their state, to their region, which has been so impacted by changes in our environment, and I yield back my remaining time.
The gentlewoman from Ohio yields back the balance of her time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Louisiana. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, let's try this again. I believe I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Lynch of Massachusetts. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following. Section. The amounts otherwise provided by this Act are revised by reducing the amount made available for Department of Energy, energy programs, fossil energy research and development, and increasing the amount made available for
Chairman,
Corps of
I ask
Engineers.
unanimous consent that the amendment be considered as read.
Objections to order. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes on his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to thank the chairman, the distinguished gentleman from New Jersey, and also Ms. Capter from Ohio, ranking member, for the great work they've done. In spite of the fact that many members are coming up with refining amendments, I do want to acknowledge the great work they've done, for example, on the manufacturing piece that's in this bill, as well as the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, which has been amply funded and is so important to a lot of the coastal communities. Myself representing the Port of Boston and a large swath of the South Shore of Massachusetts, some beautiful cities and towns, I do appreciate the work that they've done. However, there does appear to be a gap in funding with respect to the Army Corps of Engineers, and the purpose of my amendment would be to increase funding to the construction account for the Army Corps of Engineers by $20 million, and this increase would, of course, be offset by decreasing the fossil fuel research account by a corresponding amount. I am fortunate to represent a district that relies heavily and benefits greatly from the proximity to the coast, and I have wonderful, historic, beautiful towns and cities like Quincy, Weymouth, Hull, Cohasset, Hingham, and Scituate that as I say, are benefiting greatly because they're on the coast. They house commercial fishing fleets and host wonderful beaches and marinas, and they're vital components of our statewide economy and regional economy. But while these benefits are there, they are also exposed to most recent violent coastal storms that have become increasingly devastating in recent years. Like many of my colleagues, I've seen firsthand the devastating effects that these much more intense storms have had on our communities. Beaches erode and roadways and bridges get washed away. In our case, we have not been hit as hard as places like the district from the gentleman from Louisiana or New Jersey and New York in the Superstorm Sandy effects, but much of our seawall infrastructure and protection for our beaches has been damaged considerably. And we benefited from prior Congresses that have made sure that the funding and the maintenance has been there to preserve that protection. And we are at that point again. It seems like we're having 100-year storms every 3 or 4 years now in my district. And I'm sure it's like that in a lot of places across the country. And I think it's entirely appropriate that we balance this out. We rebalance the priorities here by putting $20 million into the construction account for the Army Corps of Engineers, while we are removing a corresponding amount from the fossil fuel research account. I think that most of us realize that the impacts of climate change are at least increasing the intensity of the storms that we've seen in recent years. And we need to provide the Army Corps of Engineers in our communities with the resources they need to protect against these natural disasters. And I believe my offset does that in a fitting way. Like President Obama, I think we need an all-of-the-above energy policy. And I'm not here today to debate the cause of global warming or climate change, but temperatures and sea levels are rising, and fossil fuel consumption is a contributing factor. So as long as we are forced to rely on fossil fuels, we need to also deal with the fallout from our own energy policies. We need to protect our coastal communities from future devastation. And for these reasons, I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Gentleman from Massachusetts yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey
seek recognition? I move to strike the last word, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 5
minutes. Chairman, I rise to oppose the gentleman's amendment. I share the gentleman's support for smart investments in our nation's water resources infrastructure, though. In fact, the Army Corps of Engineers has always been one of the top priorities in our energy and water bill. Total program level funding is $50 million above the budget request and almost $150 million above the post-sequester level. There's very strong member interest in the harbor maintenance activities, though most of these additional funds were included in the operation and maintenance count. Even so, construction funding is less than 1% below the President's budget. On the other hand, the bill already reduces funding for fossil energy by $84 million below the fiscal year 2013 level. That's a 16% reduction. Fossil fuels such as coal, oil, and natural gas provide for 82% of our nation's energy needs, and we will need to continue to use these valuable energy resources for generations to come. Research conducted within this program ensures we use our nation's fossil fuel resources well and cleanly as possible. In fact, we increase the efficiency of our fossil energy plants by just 1%. We could power an additional 2 million households without using a single additional pound of fuel from the ground. We simply cannot take a further reduction to this account, and I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment. And yield back.
Gentleman from New Jersey yields back the balance of his time. For all purposes, the gentlewoman from Ohio seek recognition.
Yes, I move to strike the last word.
Gentlewoman from Ohio is recognized for 5 minutes.
I rise in support of the gentleman's amendment. Congressman Lynch, I think, has really thought through this proposal very well. His is a modest amendment, and actually, the bill that we are considering is $29,425,000 above the budget request of the administration. So he is merely conforming his amendment to the initial request. For the record, we anticipate that the department will, with this change, spend approximately $420 million this year for fossil energy research and development. I agree with my esteemed colleague from New Jersey about the importance of natural gas, for instance. Ohio is a state that has benefited deeply from that. A lot of that technology is going very well, and the companies are making significant profits. They can invest some of that in their own advanced development now. And with the additional drilling on public lands for oil and so forth, we are producing more than we have in modern history over the last several years. So I think it's worthy to transfer some of these dollars to the Corps. We have over $60 billion worth of Corps projects that are backed up, and in terms of job creation, that just rings home across this country because those Corps dollars will be put to work in projects that have been backed up from coast to coast. I would yield additional time to the gentleman.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding, and I appreciate her gracious remarks. I do want to point out, though, that since 2010, we've cut $688 million from this account. Now, we all have great respect and admiration for the Army Corps of Engineers, but cutting $688 million since 2010 is reducing their ability to prioritize those projects around the country that need to be worked on. Now, some of those are Democratic districts and some of those are Republican districts, and that's not what this is about. This is about our infrastructure. And so a $688 million cut since 2010 is a serious obstruction for them to do their job. And that's all I'm asking here. I'm asking that we recognize our responsibility and our stewardship of, protecting seawalls and ports and marinas, whether they're on the Great Lakes or whether they're on the Atlantic or Pacific coast, but just asking that we step up and meet our responsibility in a meaningful way. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. I evidently, very strongly support his amendment, and I yield back my remaining time.
Gentlewoman from Ohio yields back the remainder for time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Tennessee seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mrs. Blackburn of Tennessee. At the end of the bill before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available by this act may be used by the Department of Energy to finalize, implement, or enforce the proposed rule entitled Energy Conservation Standard Ceiling Fans and Ceiling Fan Light Kits, and identified by Regulation Identification Number 1904-AC87.
Gentlewoman from Tennessee is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I begin to talk about this amendment that Mr. Rokita and I have worked on and bring to you today, I want to pause and take just a moment and commend our appropriators and the chairman. He is accustomed to seeing me come down and try to cut 1%, 5% more out of the budget, but the appropriators this year have done that work for us. This budget that is $30.426 billion is below. It is $2.9 billion below last year's level, $700 million below the sequester level, and $4 billion below the President's request. Indeed, it's below the pre-Pelosi budget, which was $31.5 billion. So, as my former colleague in the Tennessee State Senate used to say, Tim Burchett, now mayor of Knoxville, he would quote Tennessee author Alcee and said, "When we find the good, we praise it." So I praise them for doing these cuts on the front end, and I focus my attention on the issue we have with ceiling fans and this administration's interest in over-regulating ceiling fans. As many of my colleagues know, ceiling fans and ceiling fan light kits already face existing regulations set in place by the Energy Policy Act of 2005. These provisions burden ceiling fan manufacturers with ineffective mandates. However, despite the current mandates, the Department of Energy is looking to require additional mandates that will impact everything from the angle of the blade, shape, airflow, light kits. They are determined to redesign the American fan and have issued a 101-page rulemaking framework document which evaluates the potential energy savings that new regulations would supposedly provide. We've already seen the federal government stretch their regulatory tentacles into our homes and determine what kind of light bulbs we have to use. Now they're coming after our ceiling fans. It is a sad state of affairs when even our ceiling fans aren't safe from this administration. Enough is enough. These new regulations being considered by DOE will significantly impair the ability of ceiling fan manufacturers like Hunter Fans in Memphis to produce reasonably priced, highly decorative fans. They will force our constituents to use less energy efficient mechanisms to cool their home using more energy, and it is imperative that we join together and prohibit any funding in this bill from being used by DOE to finalize, implement, or enforce new regulations on ceiling fans. And I yield the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman from Tennessee yields back the balance of her time. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
No.
What?
Another amendment is currently pending.
Oh, I'm sorry.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today in strong support of the amendment offered by my friend, the gentlelady from Tennessee. And like her, I also want to thank the appropriators. As a member of the Budget Committee, our responsibility is to issue top-line numbers that we stay within in order to bring down the deficit and ultimately address the towering debt that we're facing as a country, not only today, but the even worse debt we're going to be facing given the current trend that we're on in the future. Mr. Chairman, remember when we were told to keep our tires properly inflated and get a regular tune-up to save fuel? Some people snickered and commented, is this an energy policy? Well, at least those ideas actually saved energy and actually saved cost, albeit a drop in the bucket. But now, in one of its latest efforts, along comes the Department of Energy and proposes a regulation to impose destructive and unnecessary energy efficiency standards for ceiling fans. And like much of their agenda, it is completely counterproductive. It's big government run amok. Another example. It's an example of the complete disregard bureaucrats have for the practical implications of the regulations that they issue. The Department of Energy contends that a certain amount of energy would be saved by requiring greater efficiency from ceiling fans, as the gentlelady mentioned and explained. Now, of course, that ignores the fact that ceiling fans are already far more energy efficient than other cooling devices like air conditioners. Recently, General Electric published an article stating that an average electric
central air conditioner consumes 5,000 watts of electricity during operation. By contrast, a ceiling fan consumes as little as just 30 watts when operating under similar conditions. That's over 165 times less electricity than consumed by your typical central air conditioning system. Proposed ceiling fan regulations would increase the cost of ceiling fans and reduce the manufacturer's ability to produce aesthetically pleasing devices marketable to people like us, the consumers. As a result, energy savings from these efficiency standards would not outweigh the increased cost of energy consumption brought about by the consumers foregoing ceiling fans and shifting to high energy consumption devices and increased usage of existing devices. The Department of Energy's proposed regulations on ceiling fans are absolutely counterproductive. They will encourage more energy consumption, they will reduce consumer choice, and they have the potential to destroy jobs, including in Indiana. Americans need an energy policy to unleash our economy, not economically destructive dictates from Washington bureaucrats. This is yet another example of this administration double-dipping in the pockets of Americans, using taxpayer dollars to raise prices on consumers. And as such, I urge a yes vote on this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Indiana yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Ohio seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word, Mr.
Gentlewoman
Chairman.
from Ohio is recognized for 5 minutes.
I rise in opposition to the gentlelady's amendment, and I wish to point out to our colleagues that this amendment will prohibit any funds made available by the Act from being used by the Department of Energy to finalize, implement, or enforce the proposed rule entitled Standards, Ceiling Fans, and Ceiling Fan Light Kits, and identified by Regulation Identification Number 1904-AC87. Now, the Department of Energy is initiating the rulemaking and data collection process to consider amending the energy conservation standards for ceiling fans and ceiling fan light kits. Making ceiling fans more efficient would potentially reduce carbon output by 22 million metric tons. This amendment would erode the Department of Energy's effort to curb carbon emissions and save consumers money on their electric bills. The Department estimates that the higher standards for ceiling fans will result in $4.3 billion in undiscounted energy bill savings through 2030. Also, I would be remiss if I did not point out that these amendments seek to undercut the administration's rulemaking authority given to them by us, by Congress. Speaker after speaker on the other side of the aisle criticized this administration for not undertaking rulemaking on other issues and instead issuing guidance. Well, now we have rulemaking that allows for public comment, and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are still not satisfied. The Department is following its responsibility under the Energy Policy Act of 2005 to regulate ceiling fans' energy usage. And you know what? It's not a bad idea. We actually own ceiling fans in our family. And what's interesting about them is, if you have like 2 or 3 speeds on them, the first speed, which is supposed to be the low speed, is more than we want. And it's very hard to get these fans demonstrated in the showroom sometimes. And if you want to be a responsible consumer, I think it would be really helpful to the buying public to have standards, to be able to have labeling, to know what you're buying. But it's a market that really is, it's an important market. I would guess it's one that's growing in our economy, but I think it's really important to have this kind of effort. The industry will be able to comment. That's what rulemaking is all about. We can work with consumers. Consumers like us can write in. We can make our comments, and overall we get a better product. We get one that's more energy efficient. I know that there's a Hunter Fan Company located in Memphis, Tennessee, so I imagine the gentlelady may be speaking on their behalf, and that's okay. That's what we're all here for. But, you know, the consumers out there also have a right to try to buy the most energy-efficient product. The fan that we bought, the light's too bright in the ceiling, and I don't know if you ever tried to install one of those things. I mean, it's not so easy to get that off and to put the different bulbs in and all. So I think it's an industry that is growing and improving, and I would think that they could use a little bit of help. So this amendment is anti-consumer. I think it should be defeated, but I admire the gentlelady for bringing it to the floor and the gentleman who supported her. But I think working together we can all make it a little bit better for the environment, for consumers, and for the companies. They'll sell more fans if people have more confidence in their product. And I yield back my remaining time.
Gentlewoman from Ohio yields back the balance of her time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Tennessee. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment. Will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 31, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Higgins of New York.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, this bipartisan amendment seeks to stop a flawed plan that would endanger crucial Army Corps projects in the Great Lakes region. The Army Corps of Engineers, Great Lakes and Ohio River Division is attempting to move key functions performed in Buffalo and Chicago regions out of their respective states. This is unacceptable. When it comes to protecting the safety, health, and future of our waterways, there is no substitute for having a team of qualified people on the ground. Taking key staff out of western New York will only hinder the delivery of high-impact projects already in progress. And any plan to turn the Buffalo and Chicago districts into mere satellite offices is a wrong-headed decision to divest in our Great Lakes. In my community alone, the Army Corps is overseeing $44 million restoration of the Buffalo River, a $359 million restoration of the former Lindy site in Tonawanda, among dozens of other projects. The Buffalo District oversees 38,000 square miles from Messina, New York to Toledo, Ohio. Planning, constructing, and operating water projects to reduce flooding, maintain navigation, protect the shoreline, and support water quality efforts. Failure to see these projects through to completion would not only harm western New York, but delays and cost overruns would impact the bottom line of the Army Corps. Mr. Chairman, the Great Lakes system moves more than 160 million tons of cargo a year, supports 227,000 jobs, and contributes $33.5 billion to the annual economy. As an engine of economic activity and valuable natural resource, we should be committing more resources to the Great Lakes, not less. A similar amendment was offered by Senators Kirk and Durbin and was adopted by the Senate Appropriations Committee last week. I thank my colleagues, especially Mr. Collins, Mr. Lipinski, and Ms. Schakowsky for their support of this bipartisan amendment and urge its adoption. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman may not reserve. The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 5 minutes.
I will support the amendment, but I do have some concerns. Of course, we want the Corps to take a look at the cost of their operation across the nation to see where they can make savings. We are seeking from the Corps information before we make any final decisions, but I'm supportive of their objectives, and we just need to take a closer look at the financial justification for what they're doing, and I yield back.
Gentleman from New Jersey yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 5 minutes.
I want to thank my colleague, Mr. Higgins from New York, for putting forth this amendment. He and I stood together in Buffalo to talk about the adverse effects this proposal by the Army Corps of Engineers would have on the growth and maintenance of the Great Lakes, one of our nation's greatest resources. But this issue is not specific to just western New York, and it's not partisan. It's about preserving our Great Lakes. Many of us don't know, but there are 4,500 miles of U.S. coastline along the Great Lakes, making it larger than both the Atlantic and Pacific coasts combined. And among this huge length of coastline, there are hundreds of projects. Many harbors that are critical to commercial navigation and recreation are in serious disrepair. By moving contracting officers, those who are on the ground and require face-to-face contact with the companies doing the actual work, these projects will only fall further into disrepair. It won't save a dollar to move these employees to an office far from the site of a project. If you move these workers to Detroit or Louisville, some of them working on Buffalo or Chicago area projects will have to be flown in and stay at local hotels at government expense. How can this possibly save money? Common sense would say it's going to be more costly. This amendment is simple, and it will prevent funds in this bill from being used for this proposal. It will help maintain the Great Lakes, which are a great key economic driver to our national economy, and I hope my colleagues will support this bipartisan amendment that will ensure the Army Corps of Engineers will provide timely delivery on projects that reduce flooding, protect the shoreline, maintain navigation, and support water quality efforts all along the Great Lakes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from New York yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Illinois seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentlewoman from Illinois is recognized for 5 minutes.
First, I want to express my thanks to the chairman for saying that he would accept this bipartisan amendment, and to my colleagues who have spoken about it. The decision to eliminate many of the functions from the Chicago and Buffalo office were done without consultation with the local communities and without seeking the approval of the Congress, which is what they are supposed to do. The downsizing just in Chicago could cause as many as 200 jobs lost in our area, and it certainly could affect the health and safety of our waterways. Chicago is the point of entry from the Mississippi River to the Great Lakes, and its harbors are of major economic importance, not just to Chicago, but to the entire Great Lakes region. As my colleagues pointed out, a shoreline greater than either the Pacific or the Atlantic coast. Actually, I just learned that from you today. Thank you for that important information. Its harbors are of major economic importance to all of us, and it assists in the rehabilitation of the Chicago shoreline. It also, from the Chicago District Office, leads the fight against the spread of the Asian carp into Lake Michigan. I have very serious concerns about the downsizing of the Chicago District and what impact it would have on those efforts. And like the chairman, I understand the Corps' efforts to reduce costs and our interest in doing that. But the minimization of the Chicago and Buffalo areas would trade short-term savings with much more significant and lasting long-term costs. As my colleague pointed out, Senator Kirk and Senator Durbin passed a similar amendment in the Senate, and so I urge all of my colleagues to join in supporting us in this important bipartisan amendment to prevent the Army Corps from reducing its Chicago and Buffalo offices. I yield back my time.
The gentlewoman from Illinois yields back the balance of her time. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Ohio seek recognition?
Yes, I move to strike the last word.
The gentlewoman from Ohio is recognized for 5 minutes.
And I want to thank Congressman Higgins for offering this important amendment, and Congresswoman Schakowsky for her leadership on lakes issues, and also to Chairman Frelinghuysen for his openness to those of us who happen to live in the Great Lakes region. As this, obviously I rise in support of the amendment, but also just wanted to say on the record to the Corps, it would be wonderful if somebody over at the Corps had a map and they took all the watersheds of the Great Lakes and they put them all together, and then the staff for the Great Lakes would be located somewhere in those watersheds. Because right now, that isn't the case. And it causes us all kinds of bloody problems up in our part of the world, where we do adjoin Canada up there. You know, there's another country north of us. And it has been so hard to get them to recognize the coastline that you described. And so this is my moment to vent a little bit on the floor and say, hello, Corps. We're out there, and I happen to represent the largest watershed in the Great Lakes. And we really need the Corps' focus on the most important freshwater system that exists on the face of the earth. 20% of the fresh water on the globe, surface fresh water, is up in our region, and it always seems like it's never together. It's never together. So the gentleman's amendment helps to focus a little bit on this, but the challenge goes beyond just this amendment. And I know the Corps will hear us, and I know as they talk about restructuring, meeting budget realities, they will view us as a system that is important to think of as a whole, not just in little pieces and dangling participles and things that happen out there, but rather as an extraordinarily important water system for our continent and for our world. So I wanted the opportunity to say that on the record, and I thank Congressman Higgins very much for his leadership, and I thank the Chair for his understanding. We in the Lakes face our own set of issues, and we need the Corps' full cooperation. I yield back my remaining time and ask my colleagues to support the Higgins amendment.
Gentlewoman from Ohio yields back the balance of her time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New York. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 32, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Wahlberg of Michigan.
Gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. My amendment prohibits the use of funds to be used to carry out Section 801 of the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007, which creates a national media campaign to promote alternative green energies. The 2007 energy law directs the Department of Energy to run a national media campaign to promote alternative energies, encourage energy efficiency, and discourage the use of fossil fuels, authorizing $5 million a year. Now, promoting green energy technology is really not the role of the federal government, apart from an all-of-the-above energy plan. And it certainly is not part of the core mission of the Department of Energy. The American people don't need more government bureaucrats to tell them what energy sources they should use. The government needs to get out of the business of picking winners and losers in the energy market, and certainly shouldn't be funding advertising campaigns on behalf of private green energy firms, which is normally a losing proposition to the taxpayer. This amendment is more than fair. It was included in the last Congress's attempt at this legislation, and I urge my colleagues to support it and to fund this taxpayer media campaign. I yield back my time.
Gentleman from Michigan yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word, and I'm in support of the gentleman's amendment.
Gentleman from New Jersey
back.
is recognized. Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Michigan. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
I have an amendment to the desk, Grayson number 1.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 14, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Grayson of Florida.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
This amendment, Mr. Chairman, expands the list of contractors who are forbidden from contracting with the federal government to include such contractors as those who have been convicted of embezzlement, theft, forgery, bribery, etc. This amendment is identical to language that was inserted in the Military Construction Veterans Administration and the Homeland Security appropriation bills by voice vote. Since brevity is sometimes an underappreciated virtue, I reserve the balance of my time.
Reserve the balance of his time, but gentleman may yield back.
Then I yield the balance of my time. Thank
Gentleman
you.
from Florida yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose is the gentleman from New
Move
Jersey
to strike the last word. We accept the gentleman's amendment.
Gentleman from New Jersey
yield back.
accepts and yields back the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman offer an amendment?
For the purpose of entering into a colloquy with the chairman.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to enter into a colloquy with the chairman of the Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee, the distinguished gentleman from New Jersey. Mr. Chairman, the Paducah Gases Diffusion Plant for many years was the only plant operating in America in which uranium was enriched. And this facility has met the national security needs of the United States since 1952, producing enriched uranium for nuclear weapons and commercial nuclear reactors. On May the 24th, 2013, it was announced that the facilities of Paducah Gaseous Diffusion Plant would be transitioned back to the Department of Energy, resulting in 1,200 lost jobs and a vast start and need to clean up the area. Pursuant to the Atomic Energy Act of 1954, the Secretary of Energy now has full responsibility for decontamination and decommissioning cleanup work at the Paducah site and for reindustrialization of the materials and the facilities at that site. I was pleased that Secretary Moniz recently announced on July 3rd requests for offers to utilize the assets, land, and facilities at the Paducah Energy site. As we move forward to finish the legacy cleanup of this plant, and most important, to reindustrialize that site to create new jobs, we are going to need to work with the Chairman's committee on a very close basis. I hope that we can work with you in the coming years to ensure that we provide the Department the necessary support to accelerate reindustrialization through the request for offers process and also expedite the cleanup. I want to thank the distinguished gentleman from New Jersey personally for his commitment in working with us on this, for the job that you have done on the 2014 Energy and Water Appropriation Bill, and I just hope that you will continue to work with us on this.
Will you yield to me?
I'd be happy to yield.
I look forward to working with my colleague, as I have over the years, my friend from Kentucky, Mr. Whitfield, who's a strong advocate on behalf of Kentucky, jobs for Kentucky and the Paducah plant. And we do appreciate the work the Department is doing to reindustrialize the Paducah site. We also recognize that the cleanup on the site must get done in a timely fashion, and we hope to work with the various stakeholders and with Congressman Whitfield to ensure that that happens. And thank you for yielding.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And with that, I'd yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Kentucky yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
I have an amendment to the desk, Mr. Chairman.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 26, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Barrow of Georgia.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this week marks the beginning of sequestration-related furloughs in my district. As a result, 3,200 employees at Fort Gordon near Augusta, Georgia, will be doing without 20% of their pay for the next few months. Also, like many in this House, my district is home to projects caught in the Corps of Engineers construction backlog. In particular, the new Savannah Bluff Lock and Dam near Augusta has been waiting for repairs by the Corps of Engineers for 13 years since Congress first authorized them. This bill includes language to allow the federal government to purchase more cars on top of the 700,000 vehicles it already owns. My amendment would simply prohibit the expenditure of funds to purchase more vehicles. I believe there are better ways to spend that money. I'm serious about cutting unnecessary and wasteful spending. I also believe that cutting spending shouldn't be an end unto itself. It's an opportunity to reduce our deficit, but it's also an opportunity to make our government work better. This amendment represents a relatively small change to the bill, but I believe it speaks to a larger principle. It would be an inappropriate use of taxpayer money to purchase more cars when so many folks across the country are being forced out of work and so many critical projects sit untouched. I therefore urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back.
From Georgia yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 5 minutes.
I rise to oppose the gentleman from Georgia's amendment. His amendment is overly broad and would prevent the Department of Energy, the Army Corps of Engineers, the Bureau of Reclamation, the National Nuclear Security Agency, all agencies covered under our bill, from leasing or purchasing any new vehicles. I understand my colleagues' concerns with the size of vehicle fleet within some of these agencies, in fact, share some of those very concerns. That's why our bill actually carries a reporting requirement within the Department of Energy to report on its vehicle fleet. However, this amendment would have serious unintended consequences ranging from maintenance of core sites to science at our national labs, some of which are tied to the nuclear stockpile and that are involved in protecting our nuclear sites. Therefore, I must oppose the amendment. I certainly understand his reasons for doing it. I'm supportive in theory, but there are some potentially unintended consequences, so I must oppose it and yield back.
Gentleman from New Jersey yields back the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman from California I'm sorry. For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk, number 44.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Scalise of Louisiana. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. The amounts otherwise provided by this act are revised by reducing the amount made available for Department of Energy, Energy Programs, Department Administration, and increasing the amount made available for Corps of Engineers, Civil, Department of the Army, Corps of Engineers, Construction by $2 million.
Gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a bipartisan amendment that reestablishes priorities here. It's similar to an amendment we passed overwhelmingly last year on the same piece of legislation, the Energy Appropriations Water Bill. What this amendment does is it transfers $2 million out of the Department of Energy's administrative account and moves that money into the Corps of Engineers construction budget. And the reason we're doing this is to move more projects forward, to actually get some of that backlog that the Corps of Engineers has moved forward and open up the door for projects all across the country that are vital to not only our nation's waterways, our economy, our ability to export, but in Louisiana, for example, it would provide the opportunity to move forward on the Louisiana Coastal Area Plan, which is a coastal restoration plan that's a major flood protection project. And so what we're talking about is literally one penny coming out of administration, bureaucracy in Washington, to move that money into actual construction projects. And I think when you talk to taxpayers across the country, they are less concerned about having bureaucracy in Washington. They want to actually see government get things done. They want to see this backlog get cleared out. And they want to see other projects that are important to our nation's economy move forward. And that's what this amendment does. It's a bipartisan amendment. I want to thank my colleagues, Mr. Richmond, Mr. Cassidy, who have also helped working on this. But again, this deals with projects all across the country that are in a backlog that can help move our economy forward rather than spending that money on administration in Washington. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Louisiana yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Strike the last word, and if I may ask
a
question of Mr. Scalise.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Are you seeking money for overall account, or are you seeking a certain amount of money for a project in your neck of the woods in Louisiana?
I thank the gentleman for yielding. The way that this amendment is drafted actually would apply nationwide. This would move $2 million out of that administrative account in the Department of Energy and move it into the overall Corps construction budget, so it would be available to the Corps of Engineers for construction projects across the nation.
Let me thank the gentleman for yielding. I do rise in opposition to the amendment, and let me say I appreciate the gentleman's passion for coastal restoration. I know it's a high priority for his district and others around the nation. The bill before us includes over $5 million to continue studies, engineering, and design work on various components of the program. That's nearly 6% of the entire investigations account dedicated to continuing work in coastal restoration, Louisiana. The committee had to make some tough choices in the bill, and while the Army Corps was a high priority, it was not completely spared. The construction account specifically is slightly below the President's budget request and almost 20% below the fiscal year 2013 appropriations. The Corps has numerous projects already under construction that were not included in the President's budget and so are unlikely to be funded in fiscal year 2014. While construction funding is trending downward, I believe it is most prudent to prioritize funding for ongoing projects so they can be completed and the federal government can realize the public safety, economic, and other benefits from previous spending rather than starting new projects. It's unclear to me whether this is a new project, but I take the gentleman at his word that this is not a new project. I do oppose the amendment. The reduction would substantially work against our purposes of trying to balance the federal budget and lower the federal deficit, and I yield back.
The gentleman from New Jersey yields back the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from, for what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
I would move to strike the last word.
Gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I would urge everyone to support the bipartisan amendment that's being offered by my colleague, Mr. Scalise from Louisiana. And then just in response to the last comment about reducing the budget and getting our fiscal house in order, there are two ways to do it. And one way to do that is to make wise investments that give you a return on your dollar. And this investment alone would secure the coastal area of Louisiana, which would prevent the federal government from spending money in future years because of effects of hurricanes or surge or coastal erosion, which the dollar we spend today, I'm sure, and I feel very comfortable in saying we will recoup multiple dollars because of that. If you just look at Louisiana and what we've contributed to the nation's economy and to the federal government since 1950 to 2006, the federal government, the federal treasury, received over $150 billion from Louisiana. And we do that in a number of ways, but if you think about Louisiana and you think about the coast that we're talking about 33% of the nation's seafood comes from the coast of Louisiana. We talk about almost a quarter of the nation's domestic energy. And you look at it it's home to the country's largest port system. So when we talk about what we're protecting and the $2 million that we would spend today and the amount of money that we would recoup, I would just say that it's probably the prudent thing to do is to spend this money so that we can continue to protect Louisiana and the investment it makes in the country so that we continue to do it. And I would also add that the bipartisan amendment simply builds on President Obama's 2014 budget request, and the administration called this a high-priority construction project. So I would just urge everyone to support this bipartisan amendment and to look at it not as just spending or construction, but it's truly an investment in the future of the country in terms of making sure that our energy production, our seafood, that the people in South Louisiana continue to have comfort and some protection. And I would just tell you that either we spend it today or we're going to spend it tomorrow in an exponential number, because restoring the coast of Louisiana is a national priority and it's a national need. And if you look at the coast of Louisiana, every hour we still lose a football field of land. And at some point we're going to pay for it. My preference would be to pay for it when we're not spending as much. So it's almost like that leaking roof. You can pay for it now and just replace some shingles, or you can wait a couple years and replace not only the shingles, the roof, the ceiling, the carpet, and the electrical. So at some point it's your choice. And I would just urge us to support this amendment, and let's spend the money now while we can get a great return on our investment. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman from Louisiana yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Ohio seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlewoman from Ohio is recognized for 5 minutes.
I am rising to express sympathy with the authors of this amendment, Congressman Scalise and Congressman Richmond, and your eloquent spokesman for your districts and your regions. I hope that you and the membership understand that one of the reasons that we reluctantly oppose your amendment is because the mark we were given in our bill is so far below what we need to meet all national needs. Your proposal is actually a new start if we were to, using the classification system that we use, and as much as we want to fund it, we simply don't have the funds in the bill to do it. The Corps has over $60 billion worth, $60 billion of backed up projects that they are not able to complete. It would be the biggest job creator in this country if we could move off the dime and fund those projects. But to take and prioritize Louisiana as a new start over, for example, Sacramento, that has major challenges with their levee system, or St. Louis, how does one choose? Or the Great Lakes, where we can't dredge ports. And I often tell the story that without the dredging in the Great Lakes, pretty soon, rather than having a channel that's like this, they keep narrowing the channel because we have less and less money. Pretty soon it's going to silt up. We won't be able to get anything through. So we have a problem in our bill in trying to fund everything that is necessary for the sake of the nation. So your proposal is worthy, but why should, how do we put you in the front of the line when others have been in line and we've not been able to complete their projects? We need to be able to have $60 billion in order to complete the work of the Corps with just existing projects that are already in line. So I reluctantly stand here today in a very uncomfortable position. That project that you're referring to is billions of dollars in cost, and starting it now is something we simply can't afford based on the allocation that we were given in our committee. We're below last year. We're below what's necessary for the nation, and we're paying the price from coast to coast. So Louisiana is deserving of attention, but so are 49 other states that have projects backed up. And I say to the chairman, you know, I completely share your pain in trying to hold the line at completing what is in line and not letting anyone else cut the line for their projects, no matter how worthy they are. Our fundamental problem is we don't have the funds to complete everything that is necessary. So I urge my colleagues to vote with us in opposition to this amendment. As much as I sympathize with its worthiness, it just isn't possible with everything else that is in line ahead of it. I yield back my remaining time.
Gentlewoman from Ohio yields back the balance of her time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Strike the last word, please.
The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. First, let's be clear. This is not just for Louisiana. This $2 million will be available nationwide. And that said, I rise in support of this amendment. Budgets are about establishing priorities and then making wise use of scarce resources. We know with these scarce resources, $1 million in a planning grant, which later on will be funded to greater dollars, can actually save billions in hurricane repair. So if I may say, there is lots of money right now in the Corps. The fact is the Corps has even a larger backlog. And these projects are not $2 million will complete. It takes $500,000 to begin the NEPA process or the sampling of the soil or something like that. So small amounts of dollars at the beginning can initiate a process that comes to fruition with an authorization later on. This is a national issue. Let me just speak just about Louisiana, because you could equally speak about your home state. The gasoline that is sold in Philadelphia is produced in St. Charles Parish. If a hurricane knocks out that petrochemical plant, gasoline prices rise by 20 cents a gallon in the Northeast. Now, you could say something similar in Ohio, and Mr. Garamendi in California, and others elsewhere. So we're not saying initiate a process which completely funds. We're saying give seed money so that community in California, Ohio, or Louisiana can begin the process whereon later on we can make a decision regarding greater funding. We can, as Mr. Richmond said, either spend a little bit now and potentially save billions in the future, or in our budget priorities we can say we're going to be penny wise but pound foolish. I urge passage of the amendment. I thank my colleague for introducing it. I yield back.
Gentleman from Louisiana yields back the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Louisiana. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment by Mr. Hastings of Florida, amendment by Mr. Garamendi of California, amendment by Mr. Broun of Georgia, amendment by Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas, amendment by Mr. Quigley of Illinois, amendment by Mr. Heck of Nevada. The chair will reduce to 5 minutes the time for any electronic vote after the first vote in the series. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Hastings, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Hastings of Florida.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, the recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
So the House is holding the first series of roll call votes for the day. Members have been debating amendments to the Energy and Water Project spending bill for 2014. It's one of the 12 spending bills the House must pass each year to keep the government operating. The House bill provides just over $30 billion. It's 9% less than this year and 12% less than the President requested. The administration does say that the President will veto the bill if it's sent to him as is. Vote on this amendment is a 15-minute vote. While the vote is underway, there were 2 hearings today on Capitol Hill looking at issues surrounding the Boston Marathon bombings back in April, one with the Senate Homeland Security Committee, the other held by the House Homeland Security Committee. Senator Kelly Ayotte asked Boston Police Commissioner Edward Davis on how the FBI shared information through its Joint Terrorism Task Force on the Boston bombing with his department. Here's a look.
What I'd like to get at is your testimony, having been AG, had a chance to interact with the Joint Terrorism Task Force and wanted to get your thoughts on what we needed to do to improve the MOU, to make sure that agencies like Boston are getting the right information from the federal agencies and that you are treated as an equal partner in that information sharing. So I saw your testimony on it and wanted to get your insight about what you think should be done.
Thank you, Senator. It's been a pleasure to work with you over the years, and Colonel Quinn, who's an old friend.
Yeah, Colonel, he's a great guy. Thank you.
He really is, yeah. But they did an incredible job in helping us out after the incident. After 9/11, I had an opportunity to meet with Director Mueller and talk about the help that local police could provide to the FBI as a force multiplier in the war against terrorism. And the director was incredibly gracious and opened up his offices to us. We've established these JTTFs, and they've been working very, very well. But as the Senator said, there's always room for improvement, and I think that's after this experience, when we go back and look at the series of events that occurred, there's a couple of things that come to mind. One is that the MOU could be worked on from a more equal way, so that there was an exchange of information. It wasn't all one-sided, and I think that's really important. And I also think that if there is information that comes in about a terrorist threat to a particular city, the local officials should have that information. That there should be a mandate somewhere that the federal authorities have to share that with us so that we can properly defend our community. There can be a difference between decisions made for prosecutorial reasons and decisions made for public safety. And I think that that's the stress that occurs sometimes in these investigations. And if we're aware of what the potential threat is, we can make our own decision as to what we would do with the information, which might be slightly different. I'm not saying anything was done wrong here, and I'm not saying that we would have done anything different had we had the information that the FBI had prior to this. But I am saying that there should be a full and equal partnership where everyone is sharing equally.
Well, Commissioner, I know your responsibilities as the head of a large agency in Boston, a large city. So the information that, the FBI had in advance, and obviously we'll have a separate hearing on, and I know that you're talking, I appreciate that, with the intelligence committees about how we can make sure that there is better coordination among the federal agencies. I think that's critical that we get at that, to make sure that things like the terror watch list are effective and the information. Did you have any of that in advance?
We have 4 officers who were assigned to the JTTF. There's one in each terrorism squad. But we were not aware of the information on Tsarnaev and his travel overseas.
To Russia.
Correct.
So what we need to do is make sure, you hit it right on. I mean, the bottom line is that a local police officer is most likely to encounter that individual first, as opposed to an FBI agent, because you're on the ground, you're on the streets every day, and if you don't have that information and you encounter someone like Tsarnaev in advance, then you don't have the information in your mind as to how to treat that individual and what to do with whatever actions they're making. And so if that information is not flowing down fully to state and local in the way it needs to, then we do need to address that, make sure we get to the bottom of it, because you know, I know that the FBI, they work very hard, they do a good job, but they're not on the streets every day. You are. And you're likely to encounter that person first. Is that right?
That's correct, Senator. I just want to stress, we have a tremendous working relationship with them. We are full partners in many of the endeavors that we have. But if information is compartmentalized and kept away from our Boston Regional Intelligence Center, then when my officers stop Tsarnaev or someone like him, we're not hitting on that database right away, so we're blind as to the prior information, and that puts my officers at risk. So I feel very, very strongly about this.
So this is something that we can help address here by making sure that the information sharing is improved, and that this MOU, that there's a clear understanding that the information can't just flow one way. And, you know, I have great respect for the FBI, too, and as I understand it, the cooperation was good here. What was your sense of the state, local, federal cooperation at this investigation?
It could not have been better. My first call was to Rick Delorier, the SAC of the FBI. I then called Tim Albans, the colonel of the state police, and I said we need EOD units and we need SWAT teams and we need them right away. And there was no hesitation or delay. They sent them immediately, and we worked seamlessly from that moment on. So there was no problem during the investigation. It was better than I ever could have anticipated.
That's great. And I had the privilege of working some great investigations with the FBI and state and local too, and I want you to know we will make sure we get to the bottom of this issue, because again, we can't have local police officers on the streets encountering people like Tsarnaev and not have the background, because it is an officer safety issue as well as an intelligence gathering issue. So thank you very much for being here today, all of you, and very much appreciate your testimony, and also again thank you for your exceptional reaction and response to this terrible, terrible situation.
And you can see that entire Senate hearing along with the House Homeland Security Committee hearing on the Boston bombings that also happened today. You can see it on our website. Go to cspan.org. Here in the House, members are voting on amendments to the 2014 Energy and Water Projects spending bill. Votes now on the amendment brought by Congressman Hastings of Florida that would increase funding for Energy Department science programs by $223 million. This is a 15-minute vote. The remaining votes will be 5 minutes. There are 6 votes in this particular series. Former President George W. Bush today said the nation's immigration system is broken and called on Congress to reach a, quote, positive resolution on the issue. His remarks came at a naturalization ceremony at the George W. Bush Institute in Dallas.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and welcome to Freedom Hall. I am incredibly grateful to be able to witness this joyous and uplifting ceremony. It will be inspiring to see people of different ages and different countries raise their right hands and take the oath to become citizens of the United States. All who swear the oath of citizenship are doing more than completing a legal process. You're making a lifetime pledge to support the values and laws of America. The pledge comes with great privileges. It also comes with great responsibilities. For some of you, the day comes after a long and difficult journey. For all of you, this is a defining moment in your lives. America is your country. It is more than a home. I welcome you to this free nation. I congratulate you and your families, and it's an honor to call you fellow Americans. Our immigrant heritage has enriched America's history. It continues to shape our society. Each generation of Americans, of immigrants, brings a renewal to our national character and adds vitality to our culture. Newcomers have a special way of appreciating the opportunities of America, and when they seize those opportunities, our whole nation benefits. In the 1790s, an immigrant from Ireland designed the White House. I'm familiar with the place. He did a fine job. He also helped build the Capitol. In the 1990s, 200 years later, an immigrant from Russia helped create the internet search engine Google. In between, new citizens have made contributions in virtually every professional field, and millions of newcomers have strengthened their communities through their hard work, through their love of family, and through their faith. We're a nation of immigrants, and we must uphold that tradition, which has strengthened our country in so many ways. We're also a nation of laws, and we must enforce our laws. America can be a lawful society and a welcoming society at the same time. We can uphold our traditions of assimilating immigrants and honoring our heritage of a nation built on the rule of law. But we have a problem. The laws governing the immigration system aren't working. The system is broken. We're now in an important debate in reforming those laws, and that's good. I don't intend to get involved in the politics or the specifics of policy, but I do hope there is a positive resolution to the debate. And I hope during the debate that we keep a benevolent spirit in mind and that we understand the contributions immigrants make to our country. We must remember that the vast majority of immigrants are decent people who work hard and support their families and practice their faith and lead responsible lives. Some willingly defend the flag, including two who are about to take the oath here today. At its core, immigration is a sign of a confident and successful nation. It says something about our country that people all around the world are willing to leave their homes and leave their families and risk everything to come to our country. Their talent and hard work and love of freedom have helped us become the leader of the world. Our generation must ensure that America remains a beacon of liberty and the most hopeful society the world has ever known. We must always be proud to welcome people as fellow Americans. Our new immigrants are just what they've always been, people willing to risk everything for the dream of freedom. America remains what she has always been, the great hope on the horizon, a blessed and promised land. We honor the heritage of all who come here, no matter where they come from, because we trust in our country's genius for making us all Americans, one nation under God. It's a joyful day for you all, and it's one you'll always remember, and so will I. In a few moments, we will share the same title, a title that has meant more to me than any other title. I've had a lot, and that would be Citizen of the United States. I congratulate you and ask God's blessings on you.
An event that took place earlier today. If you missed any of it, you can see it in its entirety. Go to our website, cspan.org. Look in the video library. Well, amendment voting continues here in the House on the Energy and Water Project spending bill. Members voting now on the amendment brought by Congressman Hastings that would increase funding for Energy Department science programs by $223 million. At the end of this series of votes, somewhere around 3 o'clock, the House is expected to recess until 5 for a Republican conference meeting on immigration. Members will return at 5 o'clock for more debate on amendments to the Energy and Water Project's spending bill, with further voting expected to last late into the night. We hear more about that meeting now from a Capitol Hill reporter who was on this morning's Washington Journal.
First joining us on the phone is Fawn Johnson, correspondent with National Journal, to talk about House Republicans getting together this afternoon to talk about a strategy on immigration reform. Fawn Johnson, so 3 p.m. behind closed doors, the Republicans will gather. What do you know about this meeting?
We know that this is their last attempt this month to actually try to come to an agreement about what they're going to do on immigration. We know that they are pretty solidly coming behind a plan that, as Speaker John Boehner put it, involves border security first. That could mean a lot of different things technically, but they're really emphasizing that they want to take a different approach than the Senate did last month when they passed a comprehensive immigration bill that would have legal, well, if it would pass, it would legalize people almost immediately who are in the country illegally. And we also know that there's a lot of debate inside the caucus about what to do. I believe it was Raul Labrador, a Republican from Idaho, who has led some of the immigration efforts, told people that the caucus is all over the place. Some of them would really like to see something bigger than just a border security bill coming out of the House. Others don't want to see anything coming out of the House that even has any links to legalization. And they're all very worried about the next steps if they were to pass something. They are particularly worried that a conference committee with the Senate would cause them to be forced to pass something that looks a lot like the comprehensive bill that passed last month.
Well, Fawn Johnson, the Washington Times front page this morning has this headline: GOP steps away from any path to citizenship. And they note that even many of the 32 Senate Republicans who voted against their immigration bill last month said they think a pathway to citizenship for illegal immigrants is necessary and eventually likely. But in the House, that's far from a majority stance.
Yeah, I think that's about right. And one of the issues that we have to remember here when we're dealing with the House is that they have had a little less practice in terms of coping with this concept of citizenship and legalization than the Senate. The Senate, there are a lot of new members of the Senate for sure, but there are a lot more new members of the House, particularly in the Republican Party. And the Senate has dealt with big comprehensive immigration before. They passed a bill in 2006, and they debated a bill for a very long time, 2 months at least, on the floor in 2007 before it died, both of which had a legalization and citizenship component. It's very hard to get Republicans on the House side to explain to you how it's possible to allow legalization but not some form of citizenship to anyone who is here in an undocumented status. And I think that if they were to logically carry out that particular question, they would probably be a lot closer to the Senate bill than they think they are at the moment. But it's a difficult question to ask, and it's laden with all sorts of passionate and emotional concepts, particularly for some Republicans who are in states that have high unemployment rates, and their constituents are worried about having their jobs taken away. So it's this bizarre combination of political concerns about what it's going to sound like to their constituents back home, and then actually dealing with the policy question. I'm not sure how far they're going to get in the conversation in the conference today. My guess is that a lot of that is going to be Speaker Boehner assuring his conference that he's not going to buck their will. So he's not going to do like he did at the beginning of the year in terms of turning to Democrats to solve the fiscal cliff crisis, that he's going to stick with them and let them work it through on their own. It might take a little more time than the people who want to see immigration reform done this year, but I think that that's been the big message coming out of the conference, if nothing else, for the last several weeks.
So, Fawn Johnson, what about the influence of other Republicans? George W. Bush is giving a speech today at the Bush Institute. The former president at a citizenship event is going to be pushing for immigration reform.
Right.
You've seen his brother talk about it. You have the Republicans, of course, on the Senate side that have said that they want to sit down with House Republicans and talk about it. Does this have any impact?
That's a really good question. When it comes to the former President Bush, his position on immigration is pretty clear. It's actually up on the wall in his presidential library. He had a 5-point plan that looked very much like the same plan that President Obama put out and that the Senate passed, including a guest worker program, path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants, and lots of border security. So I don't know that that's a huge surprise to any of the members of the House Republicans, but certainly that, particularly in areas like Texas and perhaps even Arizona, that might have some impact. But the thing that House Republican members have told me and others repeatedly is that they really don't want to be pressured by anybody. They are feeling pressure in their own districts. They're trying to figure out the issue. Not a lot of them are terribly familiar with it, and the things that they want are the things that have not actually been contemplated very heavily by the Senate. So, for example, a lot of them want to have local police officers be allowed to detain and to basically enforce immigration law. And this is something that Democrats and the President are fiercely opposed to, but the House Republicans think that that's actually very fair because they trust their own people in their districts more than they trust the government, particularly under the Obama folks. So it's a really difficult path for any Republican with a national profile to try and tell them what to do, because I feel like every time I talk to a House Republican, they're mostly listening to their constituents back home and to their fellow members.
Okay, so we'll be covering, as we told our viewers, George W. Bush's speech on immigration here on C-SPAN. Go to our website, cspan.org, for more details of when that will air and on which network. The Washington Post editorial page weighs in this morning and says, national necessity. Mr. Bush reminds us that immigration is a bipartisan issue. And then, Fawn Johnson, the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal, as you probably know, has been in favor of some sort of immigration reform effort. And they this morning say, House Republicans and immigration, a GOP choice, a party of opportunity or closed borders. Do the politics of this play into this discussion at all, from leadership or from the rank and file?
Absolutely. I think, it is far more a political question right now than it is a policy question. I think that the members of the House they don't want to be told what to do by the Senate, regardless of what the Senate is doing and regardless of what the topic is. So already, before you even get to the passionate, problematic issue of immigration, they're like, a kid brother, not going to be following the older brother's point of view, regardless of what it is. But the politics of this are really critical, and there are members inside the House Republican caucus who really would like to see more immigration in the country. They believe it's good for the economy. This is something the Wall Street Journal editorial page has been pushing greatly. It's something that you hear, the star of the Republican Party on taxes, Grover Norquist, say all the time. So there are definitely people inside the caucus who think that it would be a good idea to reform the immigration system such that it's easier on people coming in the future, but also on the people who are here now. It's just that there are a number of members who are reluctant because their own constituents are concerned about the idea of giving a break to somebody who's broken the law, and also, quite frankly, I think there's a racial contingent to it as well. And keep in mind that a lot of these members of the House are in very safe conservative districts that don't particularly want to see a bunch of essentially Hispanics who are poor and have been working under the table all of a sudden be on their way to citizenship.
All right, Fawn Johnson with the National Journal. Appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
Take care.
And that immigration meeting expected to start at about 3 today, where then the House will go into recess until 5 p.m. and they'll be back at 5 for further debate on the Energy and Water Projects spending bill. Right now, votes on the amendment brought by Congressman Hastings of Florida, seeking to increase funding for Energy Department science programs by $223 million, reducing funding for nuclear weapons activities by the same amount. The Senate is in session today. Lawmakers have been debating student loan interest rates throughout the day. Rates on some loans doubled on July 1st from 3.4 to 6.8%. Earlier today, the Senate blocked a Democrat student loan proposal. The vote was 51 to 49. 60 votes were needed. By the way, you can see the Senate debate live on our companion network, C-SPAN 2.
On this vote, the yeas are 156, the nays are 266. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is the request for recorded vote on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Garamendi.